And thank you for joining us for a conversation on grading reform without tears. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to our featured speaker today, Dr. Douglas Reeves. Many of you know him and his body of work, but he is one of the top sought after consultants. He is the publisher of over 40 books, and he is passionate about grading and grading reform. He has done leadership positions and works with schools in 50 states and multiple countries. He is also the creator of finishthedissertation.org, which is a free resource for those of you that are just trying to get to the end of that dissertation. And it is my privilege to go ahead and turn it over to him. So Dr. Reeves.
We're both in a role. Let's collaborate with one another. I think kids have an intuitive sense of what fairness is all about. And if you've ever pulled playground duty, as both Ann and I have, you know that you've heard the plaintiff cry, "That's not fair." Fairness is all about consistency. And so one of the things that I think is important when we talk about fairness and accuracy is we're talking about these principles, PLES, before we jump into the weeds of the details of grading. The mistake that so many districts make is that they're jumping into the weeds about the details of policy before thinking about principles. So already you've agreed upon what fairness is, and you have an intuitive sense of what it is and what it isn't. So let's talk about accuracy. I think it's a good idea for me to kind of confront my own frailties on this, because when I was teaching, 2/3 of my kids were new arrivals to the country. I was teaching mathematics. So the question is, was I really grading math or was I grading English? I think every teacher wants to be accurate. And the essence of accuracy is we're grading what we think we're grading. But that was not at all the case when we grade one thing on the report card, math, and we're actually grading something else like English. Let's use a more contemporary example from 2022. What's happening all around the United States is we believe that we're grading performance, when in fact what we're grading is home environment, when the leading cause of failure in the United States is missing homework. And so what we need to do is to be honest about the fact that if we want to say homework is important, that's fine. Call it time management, call it organization, call it homework if you want to, but please don't call it history or algebra or biology, because they really are two different things. One of the things that EL teachers in my school helped me understand was how to get better accuracy with 2-column quizzes. That is, there would be one column that was all about only numbers, symbols, letters, and then another column with the same mathematics embedded in it that had story problems. If a student was acing the first column but failing the second column, that tells me it wasn't a math problem, it was an English language literacy problem. And I think we can do more of that. You see the same thing with respect to homework. Let's take another contemporary 2022 example that I saw yesterday. Advanced placement classes, where we have students who are getting 4s and 5s on AP exam. That is, they can do college level work. They're getting Ds and Fs in the class because they're not getting homework done. So that's fine if you want to say bad boy for not doing homework, but don't say bad physics or bad calculus or bad AP English when the student is getting a 4 or 5 on those AP exams. The reverse is also true. I also worry about students who are getting A's and B's in classes and either not taking or getting 1s or 2s in AP exams. That is telling them that they're doing college level work when they demonstrably are not. So I think we can think of lots of other examples where that's really not where accuracy, which is a good principle, is not helping us. Let's go to the next one. So it's fair, accurate, specific. Tell me what I need to do. And let's first of all put ourselves in the position of the people being observed. You could come to my class and say, Doug, you need better engagement. Well, shoot, I knew that. I always need better engagement. But what I really need you as my observer to tell me is specifically, here's what to do. Doug, try equity sticks, or try rearranging the classroom, or try think time. Give me some specific feedback on how I can get better. Similarly, when we're giving feedback to students, if we think that the general purpose of feedback and grading is to help students improve their performance, then saying math C doesn't tell me very much. Tell me exactly what I need to do to get better. And let me illustrate with an example of how I've seen some teachers really change their grading practices to get to better specificity. Previously, we used to use these 20, 30, 40 item unit tests, but I've seen some teachers brilliantly do mini assessments. And by mini, I really mean like mini micro, 2 and 3 item assessments. And the other thing that they can do is, instead of taking homework to grade on Sunday night, they are immediately turning it around, praising the students when they get it right and correcting the students when they get it wrong, allowing the students within a single class period to use that feedback to get better and better and better. The common theme that you're hearing from Anne and from me is that this is not something where we're just feeling sorry for students. We're expecting high performance from students, but we're also being reasonable to the teachers, having less work done at home, more work done during the class period with a higher impact on student achievement. I've seen English teachers do the same thing. In fact, one of the greatest practices in terms of specific feedback that I've been seeing is having students out of their chairs doing work on the wall. I know this probably seems terribly old-fashioned to some of you, but I've heard too many teachers tell me the kids are kind of hunched over a paper, acting like they're doing something, nothing's getting done, and by the end of the class period, the work is still undone. When they're out of their chairs, doing work on all 4 walls of the classroom, whether it's chemistry, whether it's 3rd grade writing, whether it's math, it shows the teacher in real time what they're doing, what they're not doing, and allows for immediate specific correction. There's one other thing that I've noticed in those settings. The teacher can't be the only one providing constructive feedback. When the work is very visible on the wall, then other students can confer, can support, can edit, and provide feedback to students. That's what makes for a very powerful learning environment. Let's go to timely. So to review, we've got fair, accurate, specific, and timely. And that means give me the feedback when I need it. You know, one of the things that drives teachers crazy is when they get an evaluation in May about the things that they should have fixed back in October. That's how our students feel. When they get a grade at the end of the semester for things that are 3 and 4 months old. Timely feedback means immediate. My models here are always music teachers. They don't send a note home weeks later, you know, you kind of missed the A flat there. It's immediate, higher, lower, louder, softer, faster, slower. And you can hear in a 15-minute observation how those students get better and better and better. Well, the same can be true in any of our classes, where the feedback happens in real time during class, not a week later, not even a day later, not at home, but actually in class. Next one. So to summarize, fair, accurate, specific, and timely. One of the things that when we titled this Grading Reform Without Tears is we really have to be respectful of the fact that teachers feel overburdened right now. Time is one of the commodities. I don't care if you get $1 billion grant, you can't buy a 25-hour day. So you can't have a constructive conversation with teachers without also saying, how can we save them time? And here's a technique that I've used personally that has saved, when I say save me time, I mean it cut my grading time in half and also moves the responsibility for grading and feedback where it belongs, which is first on the student, not on the teacher. By a 3-column rubric, what I mean is the following. The left hand says exactly what I want. In fact, it really isn't a rubric. It's more like a checklist. What I want is a topic sentence, a transition. I want 3 pieces of evidence to support 3 arguments. Or what I want is the axes of the graph to be labeled correctly and the line on the graph to match the formula on the graph. Tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do. The middle column, student self-assessment. Colleagues don't accept a piece of student work that doesn't have student self-assessment on it. And then here's how you save your time. On the right-hand column, only spend your time where the student's self-assessment is inaccurate. Don't tell them stuff that they already know. Invest your time on correcting cognitive errors where they think something is okay, but it's not. And that way you save time and you invest your time much more wisely. Next slide. So here is a, whoops. Yeah. What's the different ways that we provide feedback to students? Let's take a couple of minutes of think time, use the chat room. So I know that grading is one way that we provide feedback. I'm really interested in your perspectives of other ways that we provide feedback to students as well. Take 2 minutes and use the chat room, and then we'll come back. And Anne or Lauren, let's mute everybody. No, turn off. About 30 more seconds, please. Different ways that we provide feedback. And back to large group in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And what do you see in the chat room about different ways of providing feedback?
Seeing lots of great ideas in terms of rubrics, Doug, and students providing other students with feedback, having students writing about their thinking and writing their feedback, and a lot of focusing on strengths, and just providing lots of students opportunities to show where they are in the learning progression, and doing that really through reflective practices.
And colleagues, one of the things I'd like to ask you to observe is that what you just heard from Anne and what you've heard from all of you is that level of feedback was probably more specific, more immediate, more meaningful, more productive than the grades that we provide. And yet all the blood is spilled on grading policies. And I hope you'll just stop occasionally and give yourself credit for the fact that although we argue about grading all the time, the other kinds of feedback that you just discussed are more powerful and more productive sometimes than the grades that we provide. Let's go to the next slide. Now, there are particular challenges of providing effective feedback, and let's just kind of do this one together. One of the greatest challenges of providing effective feedback is doing it honestly. And I will tell you, when it comes to providing feedback, there's only two choices. There's never perfection. There's too ambiguous and too specific. So one of the things you and I know is good job, smiley face, doesn't help us when we're on the receiving end of that. Teachers hate it when somebody comes through the classroom and leaves a Post-it note, good job, smiley face. But sometimes I see similarly ambiguous feedback provided to students. What they need is the level of feedback that is incredibly specific. And that is socially difficult sometimes. And an interesting conversation that I had yesterday at the university was particularly in middle and high school. Sometimes kids resist receiving accurate feedback, but our job is not to treat them as a customer and to tickle their ears. Our job rather is to be objective, loving and caring to be sure, but objective, clear, and precise. That's the only way that they're going to get better. Next slide. So we need to have this laser-like focus on student achievement. This comes from some of the original research that I did. And One of the things that I'm going to ask every administrator on this room to do is to really rethink the way that we do faculty meetings, rethink the way that we do professional learning community meetings, and focus on the essentials. Now, if you're familiar with professional learning communities, you know the 4 questions. What do we want students to learn? How do we know if they've learned it? What do we do if they don't? What do we do if they have? But sometimes we get bogged down in the weeds. And so I want to provide some shorthand for that. And the shorthand for each one of those is learning, assessment, intervention, enrichment. I'm not asking anybody to write minutes. I'm not asking anybody to write a doctoral dissertation about what your last meeting was about. I'm asking to focus on those 4 things: learning, assessment, intervention, enrichment. And administrators and teacher leaders, if you want to scream respect for teacher time, transform the way that you've been doing meetings just to do those 4 things. Don't ask for minutes, ask for a 4-line email. And if every faculty meeting, every department meeting, every staff meeting, every PLC meeting just focuses on learning, assessment, intervention, enrichment, you will get real work done, and you'll also be telling teachers how much you respect their time. Next. Now, here's the way you can collect data and shine a light on where the priorities are in your school. If everybody is focusing on all 4 of those questions, imagine that the vertical axis here is the frequency with which your 4-line emails show, yes, we got to learning, we got to assessment, we got to intervention, we got to extension or enrichment. Great. They're really addressing the 4 questions. But is that really what's happening in your school? Take a look at the next slide. This is the much more common profile. Everybody loves to talk about unit lesson plans. Everybody loves to talk about, they're a great unit and how they're going to present. Fewer people talk about common formative assessments. Fewer talk about intervention. And colleagues, what I'm really concerned about is extension and enrichment is too rarely discussed, particularly if you serve a high poverty school. We're so focused on intervention. We're so focused on digging out of the COVID hole that we don't recognize we've got kids who are ready for enrichment. They're ready for extension. If you don't discipline yourself to get all 4 of these done, then you're going to have a profile that looks like this rather than the previous one. Next one. So let's think about the cause of student failure. And I want to ask you to consider this scenario. We've got, whenever you look at failure rate, please don't just look at Fs alone. I had some faculty members tell me that the D is the coward's F. So if you only look at Fs, you're just going to wind up with a bunch of Ds that really represent inadequate work. So look at both Ds and Fs. And I want you to think of 10 students who receive those Ds and Fs. And take a minute to think of the primary cause of failure. And I know the usual suspects. Well, they didn't show up. Could be attendance, bad behavior. Okay. But I'll tell you what I've done. Here's my challenge to you in the next minute of think time. I've looked at records where I'll say, okay, exclude anybody who had less than 90% attendance. Exclude anybody with records of suspensions. So now I'm only looking at 90% or better attendance. I'm looking at well-behaved kids, and they still got Ds and Fs. Take a minute of think time in the chat room and tell me what the primary cause of that was. See you back here in 60. And let's come back to large group. And Ann, what do you see in the chat room?
I'm seeing a lot of missing work or incomplete work handed in, but also some other interesting observations of maybe students were struggling with the content or they didn't quite learn it, but also seeing a couple of home life, apathy, lack of motivations.
So I think there's no wrong answers here, but I really appreciate your honesty in saying a lot of it is missing work. And a lot of it may be home life. And so the issue is not to feel sorry for kids, not to let them off the hook, but let's rethink how we are evaluating them. If the cause of D's and F's are things other than academic proficiency, either missing work, home life, disorganization, and that sort of thing, then let's see what we can do to reduce that. Those are causes that we can address rather than throwing up our hands. And colleagues, the good news from today's webinar is that you can absolutely positively make a difference in reducing the DF rate right now this semester between now and May of this semester. Next slide, please. Now, traditionally, what we've done when there's missing work is to give them Fs and zeros, threats. And all I can tell you is we've been trying that for approximately 400 years of public educational history. And if it worked, then all the work should be on time and perfect. But there's not a teacher in America who's telling me that. So I know we can continue to try F zeros, but I'd like to stop beating our heads against the wall and consider some other ideas. Next slide. So here is what Tom Guskey, Susan Brookhart, and other scholars have said. If you want to summarize a century of research on grading, it's this: grading as punishment doesn't work. We've also known that corporal punishment doesn't work. We've known that for about a century as well. That doesn't stop 19 states from authorizing people to beat children to have them behave better. But at some point, you got to let the evidence get better than what our prejudices are. Next slide. So there are some things that people say, well, Doug, prove it to me. Show me the research. But sometimes it's not research. It's just math. Let's take two big things. I'm not asking anybody for a new 15, 20, 30 point fix today. I'm asking you for two big ideas. One is to get rid of the 100-point scale. The other is to get rid of the average. And here's why. You don't need research to prove this. This is just plain math. You don't need research to prove the Pythagorean theorem, that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square of the two sides. It's just math. The same is true here. Why is the 100-point scale so wrong? Because it's a math error. If A is a 90, B is an 80, C is a 70, C is a 60, but not turning work in is a 0, there's 10 points difference between the A, the B, the C, and the D, and 60-point difference between the D and the 0. That is a mathematical distortion. And that, I guarantee you, is the reason why every April, every May, you have students who simply give up because they've dug a hole so deep they can't get out of it. The 0 has killed them. It has been the death penalty. And all they do is become your worst discipline problems for the rest of the year. Now, why do we have a 100-point scale? I had somebody tell me the other day, well, Doug, we've always had it. That's not true, colleagues. The 100-point scale started in the early 1900s. It was the time of the advent of intelligence testing when we thought we could be, oh, so precise. You know, everything's on a 100-point scale so we can prove, oh, you know, that the British are smarter than the Irish, Scandinavians are smarter than the Italians, and let your imagination go forth about how we can prove who's smarter than whom with the illusion of the 100-point scale. It was the illusion of proficiency. And that same illusion persists today. And here's why I want to really challenge you, colleagues. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't challenge you. And here's the deal. Everybody listening on this call can tell me the difference between an A and a B and a C and a D and an F. I trust you. You're thoughtful professional educators, and you can say the difference between A, B, C, D, F. But you want to know what none of you can do? Tell me the difference between the 32 and the 33, the 58 and the 59, or more to the point, 89 and 90, because that's where all the arguments happen. They are 1-point differences, distinctions without a difference. And worst of all, this 100-point scale leads to disrespect for teachers. Let me explain. There's two conversations that are going to happen at the end of this semester. The first conversation is, gee, Miss Perez, how many extra points do I need to get to move from a B+ to an A-? Turns students into point grubbers and us into accountants. It's disrespectful. The respectful conversation is, ma'am, what do I need to do, learn, show, and do to move from a C to a B, or from a B to an A? That's a learning conversation, not a point conversation. So get rid of the 100-point scale. You don't have to do it. Don't tell me that your electronic computer grading system made you do it. I've looked at every one on the continent, and you can rescale the minimum maximum from 0 to 100 to 0 to 4. You don't have to have the 100-point scale. It's just a myth. And at some point, somebody has to challenge that. If they said all school buses had to be painted purple, somebody somewhere along the line would say, actually, no, you can paint them a different color. It's the same thing with a 100-point scale. It's just a myth that you have to have that. Moreover, it is a myth that perpetuates disrespect for teachers because it becomes all about points. And let's just linger for a moment on what about the real world. Nobody's going to get on the dean's list in college with points. They get there with performance. Nobody's going to get promoted on the job to manager with points. It's about performance. And so we've got to get our students to understand it's performance moving from C to B to A that matters, not points. The second issue is the average. You don't need a federally funded study to say that the average is simply wrong. And I want to be as clear as I can about this. You know what the average is. The average accumulates all of the mistakes from January and lumps them into the grade of May. Now, there's a lot of ink been spilled on social and emotional learning. A lot of ink been spilled on, oh, we want our kids to be resilient. Colleagues, I will tell you this. You cannot say, I believe in social and emotional learning and resilience and use the average, because the average undermines resilience at every turn. And there's another issue. 50 out of 50 states have state standards. For 20 years, we've said that we'll evaluate students against a standard, not against each other. You can't say, I believe in a standards-based approach to education and still use the average. The two are antithetical. So I know the average is baked into your system. I know the average is traditional. I know a lot of people cling to it, but it is not the same as standards. That's how we ought to evaluate students, based on their achievement of standards. It's not the same as a commitment to resilience. So those two things, that's it. The 100-point scale, the average, you fix those two things, you don't need a 30-point grading policy. Next slide. So the immediate fixes, as I said, are go to a 4-point scale. It's the old-fashioned one that we've had for 400 years. A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1, F is a 0. You don't use the average, but you use teacher professional judgment. Now, I know that makes some people nervous, but let me offer this contrast. But some of you remember the TV show The Office, and you remember Dwight, that kind of jerky guy, looks kind of like me and wears a crazy little tie. And I want you to imagine that Dwight is the computer programmer for your electronic grading system. Now, who do you think is better equipped to evaluate your students? Because Dwight loves the average. Dwight loves mechanical algorithms to tell your students how they're doing. Who do you think is better equipped to evaluate your students, Dwight or your professional teachers? I'll bet on your teachers any day of the week. And we've got to be able to get rid of this notion that we're stuck with these toxic practices of 100-point scales in the average when you and I can get rid of them. And there are schools around the nation, around the world, that are already doing it. Next slide. So here are some practical solutions. I'm not going to go through all of these right now because I realize we're bumping up against time, but I will just tell you, here's what I've seen other teachers do, because when they fear getting rid of the average, they'll say, but Doug, what if kids don't turn work in? You know, what if they're lazy and irresponsible? Don't you know that kids need consequences? Yes, they do. But consequences don't have to be F's and zeros. Consequences can be meaningful things like the following. They catch up. Every single week, they have the opportunity to catch up and get the homework done. One school that did that went from 385 Fs to 15 in one semester. Another school used the red, yellow, green system. Every week, they knew who was in danger of losing credit, that's red, or who was just missing some assignments, that's yellow. And they checked their backpacks to make sure that they were ready to go to school. Another school had a quiet table at lunch to get work done. Now, you may think, well, gosh, lunch, that's not much time, only 30 minutes a day. You can get a ton done in 30 minutes a day. Another school that I really admire had Coach's Corner, where they sat in the gym floor and the coaches got things done, and especially it made sense when they got things done they got things done in time for athletic practice. And of course, if you want to have grades for citizenship, behavior, management, and so on, you can do that as well. Next slide. So let's just exit out of the PowerPoint and have a few closing remarks and give people an opportunity for questions. You've been really patient, and I really appreciate your very thoughtful contributions today. But before we adjourn, I want to make sure that you have an opportunity for questions and also challenges. It's always, as you know, a safe place to make challenges, to have disagreement. So if I've said some things today with which you disagree, I know that I want you to know that those disagreements are welcome as well. And Ann and I will be happy to field those. So let's, in our final moments, take a few minutes in the chat room for any questions or challenges that you'd like to raise.
I can really appreciate your point about the 89 and the 90. I mean, I'm in grad classes right now and I'm going, why? That the score, that's stupid. I'm just give me my 4 point, but tell me how to improve this. Like, it's not helpful. And I'm in advanced studies, so I can really appreciate that when you're talking with students and their parents. And yes, it does matter that there's this little minus by my grade. Like, okay, but did she learn it? What are we talking about? So I can really appreciate that. And looking at standards-based learning versus standards-based grading, like, what's our focus? So I appreciate that.
Thank you. And let me just elaborate on a couple of things. I was at a university all day yesterday. Every one of their classes does not use the 100-point scale. They're all back to performance-based evaluation. And when you mess up, you take feedback, you respect the feedback, you resubmit it. That's the future. That's what's happening at universities. That's what's happening on the job. So sometimes I hear people say, but colleges all use the 100-point scale. No, some do, but a lot don't. There's one more thing that I want to encourage you to just smooth the conversation. I don't even use the word standards-based grading anymore because it just inflames people. I just say accurate and fair grading because I can have a much more gentle conversation if I say, hey, forget about standards-based grading because some crazy stuff has been done with that terminology. But could we all agree that we want accurate and fair grading? That's where I've tried to focus.
And I think, Doug, I would piggyback that with the grading task force that I just completed. They were doing a lot with success criteria and really focusing on the feedback end of the grading as opposed to the numeric point of it. And unanimously, every teacher that was in the pilot had more engagement and better work product by really honing in on the learning targets and the success criteria as looking at it in terms of feedback and then grading as the subset of feedback. So ultimate result was improved grades, but it's because they focused on the feedback and using success criteria.
Thank you. Anything in the chat room?
Doug, we have a couple things in the chat room. So first of all, Nicole, regarding Ohio, we're still trying to influence your state evaluation system. Thank you for the feedback. It's appreciated. Ron asks for recommendations for turning around a PLC light school. I would talk to that before I pass it to Dr. Reeves and Ann, which Ann and I are in the midst of this week, giving your PLCs immediate feedback. What is working? What do you continue to replicate? And then where do you need to grow? What make your meeting more efficient? One of the first things I do with working with a school is Jigsaw, Doug, and Rick DeForce PLC light article, because no matter where you are in the progression, everyone relates to it in some way. So that would be my 2 cents. And do you want to add to turning around a PLC light school since you're back to back with those this week?
I think one of the things that's been it's refreshing to the teachers is getting them to focus on really having the instructional conversation. And that includes the data, it includes the instructional practices, it includes student evidence, but really refocusing them to talk about instruction. It's very energizing for the teachers, as well as it gets into that professional learning piece for both of them. So that would just be my piggyback to everything that Lisa said.
And all I would add is keep it simple. There are multi-page rubrics for PLC operations that I've seen make people drown in paperwork. Don't overcomplicate it. Keep it to the 4-line email of the 4 questions: learning, assessment, intervention, enrichment. Keep people focused on that. And honestly, I think professional learning is changing. I don't think one more workshop or one more speech or one more book about an effective PLC is going to change it. What you need is on-site coaching that keeps people focused on learning, assessment, intervention, enrichment. That's where the action is.
Doug, oh, go ahead, Dan.
There's an interesting question in here from Matt Deaton that I think would be good for you to kind of address, Doug, which is how do you calculate a GPA without averaging the grades?
No, that's fine. I don't mind averaging the grade. That is the GPA. The grade point average is by definition an average. What I'm against is the average within the class. So you can take, when you're calculating a GPA, average algebra, biology, history, and so on. What I don't want you to do is within the algebra class, average September through May. Within history class, average January through May. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify that. Yeah, the GPA is still the overall average of all grades. But what I'm against is using the average for individual classes. Can we put up the very last slide that has our contact information on it, please? And let me offer a couple of support ideas for people who were kind enough to join us in today's webinar. One of the things that we are really committed to is continued support for you. So you'll see on there personal contact information. That includes my Twitter handle at Douglas Reeves, my personal cell phone number. That's my real number, which you just heard me turn off so nobody will interfere with us. Lots of free resources on this subject and many others. You can have a series of little videos to introduce this topic at creativeleadership.net. And in addition to things like grading, you'll see videos, articles, tools on leadership, on creativity, and a variety of other things. We are here to serve you. And I will just tell you, sometimes at the end of a webinar like this, people will say, well, Doug, that was interesting, but you and Ann really ought to be talking to my math department. You really ought to be talking to my parent group, my third grade team. Please count on us to do that. We do that every day of the week. And so if there's some additional conversations that you'd like us to have after and as a result of today's webinar, I want you to know that we're at your service. We really believe in supporting the incredibly hardworking teachers and administrators who are in the field right now. We can't express sufficiently how much we admire your commitment to education in the toughest year we've ever had. So thanks for all you do, and continue to count on us to be in your corner.
We will also hang out towards at the end before closing out the webinar in case anyone has questions they'd like to ask us directly.
Sounds good.
Yes, this is David Dowling from Scott High School. I had a question. I was in between devices when you guys were talking about feedback, but I did have one thing that I wanted to, I guess, inquire about.
Go ahead.
So you guys are talking about feedback being specific and timely, and I certainly wholeheartedly agree with all of those things. And my situation is somewhat unique. I'm not a traditional classroom teacher. I teach career tech. And even on that spectrum, I'm very busy because I teach advanced manufacturing and machining. So for me, I have slightly different goals, because I have a large safety component and I get spread pretty thin on time. So what I am looking for, not that I don't love everything, but what I am looking for is more efficient ways to do these things. Maybe not perfect, just like it was presented here, but better. And what I've found that I've been successful with, and what I've kind of shown other teachers, is that I wanted to give feedback. I find feedback to be a very effective, mechanism for change, and like you said, for reform for students. But I was saying the same things over and over again. So I grade an assessment on Google Classroom, for example. Maybe it's a quiz on Google Forms, or maybe it's a video worksheet, or maybe it's a performance assessment in a lab or something like that. I still provide them feedback via the Google Classroom. And I was saying the same basic comments over and over and over and over again for the same basic things. So I started a list of canned responses. And I find that I use that list very frequently because I'm saying the same basic things. You did a great job. You're very close here. Or like you said, provide specific feedback on how to improve or get better, but I include that in the canned response. So for example, if it's for example, maybe an open book quiz that they struggle with, I say, go back, review chapter so-and-so, or review this resource here and try again, and then see me if you have questions. That's all just copy paste for me at this point. And I can add that comment to anyone who fits that profile of that assessment, if there are 2 or 3 kids in that same category. And then if I need to say something specific to that student, like you guys said, and great job, you had a little trouble with this one comment, I just add a sentence or 2 on top of that. So I just wondered if anybody else had been using some copy paste or some canned responses, or if you guys like that idea.
Well, you said 2 things that are really important. I mean, CTE, frankly, has always led the way on specificity of feedback. And the reason CTE has led the way is exactly, sir, what you said. It's a safety issue. You know, nobody's going to get a B- because they lost a finger in a buzzsaw. You know, it's, you know, you either enter and leave with 10 fingers or you don't. And there's and same with coding. You know, the code works or the code doesn't. You know, you don't get an 89 because 89% of the lines of code were correct. So CTE has always had a very thoughtful and profoundly important level of expectation that you do it or you don't. So I just really want to admire what you're doing in your commitment to efficiency, and also the idea that kids kind of get what is acceptable and not. That said, I just want to suggest, sir, you're still putting too much of the burden on yourself. If you'd consider that 3-column rubric, take all those ideas that you just articulated that are common responses, put that on the rubric and have the students do it first before it comes to you. And you focus your attention only on telling them things that they don't already know. So, you know, you're preparing people who are going to the workforce. You want them to assume as much responsibility as possible. So I love your commitment to efficiency. I just think you need to give yourself a break and put more of the burden on them.
That's my point. I'm trying to put all of the burden on them and none of it on me. I am trying to shift all of the burden. So I give them feedback like a music teacher in the lab. So if I'm in the shop and we're making things, we're doing things, I'm the music teacher. Slow it down, speed it up, you know, do this, do that, wrong wrench. But I'm talking about the virtual environment. I'm talking about the students who I still want to be learning and ingesting content absent of me being physically present. And that's my goal in efficiency, because I literally need to be in 2 places at once at many times throughout my day, because I will have a small group in the classroom doing a classroom-based activity, and then I will have half the class in the lab doing, as you said, safety, you know, safety conscious activities where I have to be. So for me, when I get that Google quiz or whatever on Google Classroom, I can take my preloaded list of comments very quickly, copy paste that over and get it back to them. And I can do that from my device. And then if I have to have a specific conversation with them, I can do that and follow up. But the canned responses is hugely efficient, and I can give the feedback very quickly because I can copy and paste one comment and send the grade back to 6-10 different students at the same time. So just from an efficiency standpoint, I found it very helpful.
Agreed.
Thank you, David. About 1 more minute. Anyone else have a question or a comment for Dr. Reeves, Ann, or myself? All righty. So as Ann and I have said, the recording, the PowerPoint, and a couple other resources will be available and sent to you via email over the next 24 hours. So you should expect to get that in your inbox. If it's not in your inbox, please check your spam folder. Thanks everyone for joining us. And also we appreciate your patience as we were getting the technology up and running. So thank you, Doug and Ann, for contributing your experience and knowledge to the group. Everyone have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.